Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with 36 Cancel, and this is Coco the Weiss Cat. So we had done a set preview for Heaven's Feel recently, since it's a set I'm super excited to see coming to English. But what could be spoiled right after that? None other than Goblin Slayer. That's right, players. Goblin Slayer is coming to English. It's worth mentioning that SAO Alicization is also spoiled now to be released right after Goblin Slayer, but that's no surprise to anyone, since SAO prints Bushi more money than the Fed. I might do a video on it, I might not. We'll see. But back to the good stuff. So Goblin Slayer, unlike Fate or SAO, has no other sets. There's only one season of anime out right now, and thus there's one standalone set in JP coming out. And the best way to describe the set is that it's pretty different. I don't think any sets in English play quite like this one. Some of the strats in Goblin Slayer are like 100% different. And I can't wait to see how this shapes the English meta, but moreover, I cannot wait to try some of the stuff out in this set for myself, because I really liked Goblin Slayer and its characters, and I love some of the cards made for them. Here's hoping for some SP Priestesses and Sword Maidens, right? For those of you who don't know, Goblin Slayer is a manga that was adapted into an anime not too long ago. The basic premise is that the world is an isekai-like, which is basically a world designed like an online fantasy game. So you have adventurers, guilds, weapons, magic, monsters, and all that wonderful stuff that comes with the fantasy MMO in kind of a medieval magic setting. But in an isekai, this world is daily life. So obviously you have your civilian farmers, merchants, and then you have your adventurers that are slaying monsters and making money, and then your heroes that are out slaying dragons and demons and lords and whatnot. But then you have this guy called Goblin Slayer. This dude is a super experienced adventurer, but all he does is kill goblins. He's low ranking, not especially strong, but this guy is a goblin specialist. It comes as a giant shock to all viewers to find out that of course this crazed lunatic has a traumatic past with our little green friends. Goblins in this world are invasive, violent, and represent an existential threat to a lot of civilians because they're hard to get rid of and not many adventurers would stoop so low as to deal with them. And like any good anime monster, they have a thing for female adventurers. So Goblin Slayer, of course, happens on one of these female adventurers who's about to get Goblin'd, saves her, and she starts to follow him around, and she happens to be our priestess. And then other party members come to join them since Goblin Slayer is kind of a famous legend. You have the personification of the RuneScape random event, the Drunken Dwarf, you have Mark Zuckerberg, well, the Lizard Man, and soon flat-chested High Elf Archer, and together they slay goblins. The show has some pretty dark overtones, and it takes on a pretty different story than a lot of other isekais, and for me, it was a really enjoyable watch. So how does this translate into a Weiss set? Pretty differently, but first things first. One thing that I'm super pissed about in this expansion is that there is no enemy faction goblin deck. In fact, not a single card in Goblin Slayer is a goblin, and that's some bullshit. Bushi, what were you thinking? What a total waste of an opportunity. Not only that, there's no green in this set at all. Why not make goblins green? There would be a green enemy faction deck and it would make perfect sense. I'm so pissed. It would only take like 10 cards. Like 10? You know what? I'm making a custom goblin deck. I don't give a shit. You will see a goblin deck from 36 Cancel players, so that's my promise to you. Fun fact, before Goblin Slayer was released, I was actually planning to make a custom Goblin Slayer set, but now I'm working on another one, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, so what is in this set? Well, just like another famous isekai set, Konosuba, it's a 3-color set with no green. In yellow, we have some of the later party members like High Elf Archer, Drunken Dwarf, and Mark Zuckerberg. Honestly, yellow is pretty self-contained because a ton of these party cards mention each other and either bond or work with specific yellow climaxes outside their regular combos. So there's a mono yellow party deck with some cool Drunken Dwarf memes. In blue, you have the 3 blondes, which are Priestess, Sword Maiden, and the kind of off-blonde, sort of brown Guild Girl. A lot of these cards are super defensive, all about healing and protection, and they do some pretty wild stuff. And in red, of course, we have Goblin Slayer and Best Girl, Ushikai Musume, or Cowgirl. Cowgirl has some of the best level 0s and an early play, and a really cool standby combo. And Goblin Slayer has a bulk of the level 1 combos, great level 0s, the set's primary finisher, and on top of that, his suite of events. Something interesting about this set is how event-focused it is. Most of the events are red and centered around the multitude of tools and tricks that Goblin Slayer has in his arsenal. In fact, a lot of cards in this set are keyworded to events, can check for and fetch events, and there are even different versions of some events. So why don't we start with red since it's the namesake and the source of a lot of these events. And I want to kick things off with one of my favorite cards in the set, Cowgirl, Childhood Friend in Good Health. She's a top self Savage Brainstormer, and she climaxes with Brand New Day, the set's standby climax. When it's placed, you can pay 1 and bounce her, and if you do, you can stand one of your rested characters. The way this works is if you place the climax down and use standby to get something on the stage rested, you can order the effect so that this combo happens after you do that to stand what you just stood by. So if you play brand new day and stand by a Goblin Slayer or something, you can pay 1 and bounce this to stand that Goblin Slayer so they can attack this turn. Pretty nuts. Japan has some sets that already had this standby combo, including Symphogear, which gets really dumb if you ask me. No Game No Life introduced this to English, but Goblin Slayer has a ton of cards that can take advantage of it here. You might see this used to stand up the 2/2 Goblin Slayer that's kind of like Rhapsodic Lizbeth from SAO. Anyway, it's a good brainstorm, so let's move on. Can we talk about this uncommon runner for a second? Usually, I wouldn't stop to highlight an uncommon in the set since I need to limit how many cards I look at, but this shit is stupid. Goblin Slayer Foregone Conclusion is a free runner that can move to any position with a character facing it, and if you have 5 or more cards in your hand, he gets +1 level, plus 1500, and can be side attacked. Like, what? If this card was a double rare, it would be like $40. Give me a break. Best runner in English? Maybe. But this will be a 4 of in a lot of decks. But let's get down to business here. The Goblin Slayer level 1 combo. Goblin Slayer Detailed Strats. So he's a 4k and gets +2k as long as you have 2 or more other order characters, which is pretty good. And he has a climax combo with life or death struggle. When he attacks and you have the climax, you can choose one of 2 effects. You can either search your deck for an event called Torch, or salvage an event called Torch. Pretty good. It's a free +1 on a 106k, so that's a pretty sweet deal. But what does Torch do? Well, Torch is one of those centerpiece events that Goblin Slayer is famous for, and it's a 1/0 event that lets you move an opponent's character to an open slot on their stage. That's pretty interesting board control. Who am I kidding? No one runs that Torch. The other Torch, which comes from the trial deck, is another 1/0 event that can be played as a counter, and it's an Akatsuki event, so you can Akatsuki as a backup. And there are other characters in the set the keyword for Torch, including this cowgirl that lets you pitch a torch to salvage a character. This is a pretty interesting and pretty strong level 1 package for Goblin Slayer. So that's Torch, but we said Goblin Slayer is event-centric. So what are some others? Well, there's Canary. It's a very simple 1/0 event that goes to your memory when you play it, and if it's there at the start of your main phase, you can peek at the top 2 of your deck and your opponent's deck. Doesn't seem like a huge deal? Well, there are a ton of important cards in this set that rely on checking a good target, and you'll see some of those later, and it's great for potential brainstorms and good for compression. In the events department, we also have Haversack, Goblin Slayer's bag of tricks, where you can play it to salvage a Scroll of Gate or Torch. Makes sense. And then we have Scroll of Gate, a 3/3 counter event that if you have 5 or more order characters, lets you return an opponent's character in battle to their hand. That's a pretty straightforward way to shut down an attack. Valuable in a Goblin Slayer deck without question. But speaking of level 3 stuff, let's talk about the level 3 characters for Red. Both Cowgirl and Goblin Slayer have early plays. Cowgirl comes out early if you have 2 or less climaxes in the bin, and she top checks X where X is order characters. She also gives a character more power on attack, which is nice. Goblin Slayer comes out if you have 4 or more other order characters, gets 500 times order on your turn, and you can pitch 1 to search for an event on play. Both of these add some consistency, but are somewhat mediocre. But then you have this guy, Goblin Slayer Iron Shadow of Destruction. He gets +2k on your turn and heals on play. And he has a climax combo with Last Breath, which is when he reverses his opponent, you burn 1 and then deck kick the opponent. Now, the way this is worded, the burn isn't guaranteed, sadly, because you burn before you kick. But still, this is a great way to deal some pinpoint damage while making it tougher to cancel and impossible to save characters. He is a pretty decent finisher, all things considered. So that's our red package. Of course, there are other good red cards, but we need to stop somewhere, and we'll mention some in the next part, since our blue suite mentions Goblin Slayer a lot. So like we said before, blue has Guild Girl, Priestess, and Sword Maiden. Both Guild Girl and Sword Maiden have their own pair of combos that make waifu-centric decks very possible. The combos give you some free stock and draw you some cards at level 1, and at level 2 they search at Akatsuki. There's some more deck-agnostic tech pieces here too, like this Guild Girl that assists and gives you a free stock when your opponent either refreshes or levels up depending on what you choose, and this Sword Maiden that top checks for power and is a cost 0 bottom decker. But let's talk about Priestess, since it's clear she got the most attention here. First, we have Blue's Brainstormer, a tap self-searching brainstormer that adds +2k when a character's attack triggers a climax. Not the worst thing I've ever seen. There's also this Priestess that when she dies, you can pay 1 and clock yourself to top check 3, and has Alarm to add 1k to an order character. She kind of reminds me of Inaduma from Conquest. And then we have this Betty Time Priestess, who gives your characters +1k on your opponent's turn, and hands out 2 1k buffs when you play a climax. But come on, that's not why we're here. Anyone who knows anything about Goblin Slayer knows that I'm beating around the bush here, and anyone who doesn't know must be wondering what I'm talking about. Well, to cut to the chase, Goblin Slayer has a rather famous level 3 priestess that carries a reputation with it, so let's take a look at her. Priestess, Pure Protector. First, if you have Goblin Slayer True Bond in your clock, she gets -1 level, and he's not a bad little level 0 either. On reverse, You can top check 3 and pitch 1, and he has Alarm to peek at the top 2. On its own, that's pretty good. But stick with me here. So when she comes in, you can draw 2 and pitch 1, and then she has a Climax combo with great protection. When she attacks, you reveal the top card. If it's an event or order character, she gets the following 2 abilities until the end of next turn. First, she gets plus 1500 power, and second, at the beginning of your opponent's attack phase, all their characters get -1 soul. And yes, it does work like that. If you have 3 priestesses that all hit, you dish out a whopping -3 soul to each of your opponent's characters. And these shenanigans start at level 2. Now think back to all the stuff in this set that peaks at the top of your deck, including the early play condition, which alarms for it. And it works on events, so only climaxes with. Oh, and to add insult to injury, even if your opponent triggers a wind, that -1 soul from the winded priestess won't go away. Look, this is pretty nuts. Even having one of these go off seriously slows down your opponent's pressure. Even if you're not running a strong finishing combo with a unique level 3 climax, you'll still be dealing out a lot more damage than a lot of your opponent's characters will be able to. This is a totally different strategy, players, the Soul Stall. Also, she gets power and her climax is a pants, so the consistency is there. There are great blue backups in the set, and the back row is strong to support her too. The Priestess package is the real deal. Welcome to the stacks decks of Weiss. Who got that reference? Well, for those of you who did, I don't think it will be that bad, but this is radically different than anything else we see in English right now. Without getting into a discussion about how good this will be in the coming meta, or if this will be game-breaking for English, I'll give this simple analysis. This card deserves its reputation, and playing against it will be super annoying. But before we move on... Oh wait, you thought we were done with blue? You didn't think blue had an event of its own? You thought that there wouldn't be a card about sleeping with 2 naked blonde virgins to bring someone back from the dead? Man, you thought wrong. Miracle of the Shared Bed Resurrection. You send a Sword Maiden and a Priestess from your stage to the waiting room, and then you choose 5 cards in your clock and put them into your waiting room, and put this card into your memory. Right. I'd say think about this for a second, but I'm sure you don't have to. Just imagine playing a deck where you have this event in tandem with a soul-stalling Priestess. The math is pretty simple here and kind of disgusting, so I'm just going to stop thinking about it. That's a lie. I can't wait to play this deck. Okay, enough about blue. Let's just move right along to the yellow, or the party deck. Yellow is pretty self-contained in this set. We've got Lizard, Elf, and Dwarf, and that's about it. You throw them together and you make a deck. At level 0, you've got some choice pieces though. There are 2 really good elves here. This high elf free runs in the front, and when she comes in, you can shuffle 2 characters back into your deck to give her a soul until the end of turn. The high elf is also a brainstormer, and she's pretty interesting. So she's a tap 2 salvage brainstormer that works a little differently. Instead of milling 4, she mills 6, and if you hit any climaxes, you get 1 salvage. So this increases the number of cards milled and the chance of a successful brainstorm, but disallows any super successes. So no matter how many climaxes you hit, you only get 1 card. Now you also have to hit a climax with the shot icon, but so what? You run the 8-shot deck in party, so it's whatever. Now this brainstormer also has a combo that when you trigger one of your shot climaxes, Comrades Who Walk Together, you can salvage a level 3 Lizard or level 3 Dwarf, which happen to be your primary finishing combo. And speaking of the Lizard, there's another level 0 to talk about here. It gives all your Dragon Tooth Warriors plus 2k, and when it comes in, you can clock yourself to salvage an event called Dragon Bones. Okay, so what the heck are those? Well, let's start with the event, and with that, we'll move on to Yellow's level 1. Dragon Bones is a simple event. 1-0, and you rest a character with Lizard Priest in its name, and then you put a Dragon Tooth Warrior from your hand onto the stage, and Dragon Tooth Warrior is a 2-1 8500. So the idea is you had this level 0, salvage an event with it, and then use it to cheat out a 10.5k level 2 at level 1. Neat trick, bro. It's probably annoying to fight again since the whole combo is basically free, but before we move up the chain too far, I want to talk about the yellow primary level 1 combo. It's another high elf archer, and she has an ability that no event played by a player with the same name can be played again in the same turn. So if you play an ODM, a Dragon Bones, a Torch, a Toilet, or whatever, you can play another one in the same turn when she's on the stage. Being that you're playing Goblin Slayer, this has the potential to limit you as well as your opponent, but if you're playing yellow, your only event is probably Dragon Bones, and if for some reason you do that little combo twice, just do it before you play her. And the climax combo is as follows. When this card's battle opponent becomes reversed, you mill the top 3 cards. Then you salvage X characters where X equals the number of soul triggers on the cards milled this way. It's different for sure and has the potential to miss, but it can net you a lot of free cards. You're trying to reverse on 6k, which isn't great, but it's free, and you're playing the combo anyway. All in all, not bad. Now this does encourage you to play a lot of soul triggers, but you'll see how that comes in handy later. And by later, I mean after I go over Yellow's secondary finisher. This High Elf is a hard Musashi that cancel burns for X+1, where X is the level of the card you mill when your opponent cancels damage. And when she comes in, you can pay an extra 2 to bounce a character on your opponent's stage, and that's becoming more and more useful. Expensive to use in this case, but probably worth it if you really want to use it. She's a good level 3 for sure, but the deck plays 2 other level 3s, Dwarves and Mark Zuckerberg's. But Mark Zuckerberg is only here to set up your finishing combo, so let's introduce him. When he comes in, he heals, and then he has a climax combo with comrades who walk together. If he's in your front row and you're level 3, you can put the Drunken Dwarf from your waiting room onto the stage at any slot for free. He doesn't do anything else for us, so here's the Dwarf. Dwarf Shaman, repeating stone bullets, comes in and draws 2 to pitch 1 whether you play him or grab him with Mark. But his main draw is the combo. When he attacks and comrades who walk together is in your climax zone, you can pay 4. If you do, mill 5 cards and then perform the following action X times. Deal 1 damage to your opponent, where X is equal to the number of soul triggers milled this way. So if you mill 5 cards and let's say hit 4 soul triggers, you deal 1 4 times. So instead of having to cancel 4 damage once, your opponent needs to cancel 1 damage 4 times. So you need a lot more climaxes to live through this. It's expensive and it can whiff, but man, it is devastating if it hits. But obviously, the strat is to make sure it hits hard. We have cards in yellow that can shuffle soul triggers back into your deck. All your climaxes have soul triggers, your backup has a soul trigger, your bone dragons have soul triggers, and there are some good level 2s in yellow with triggers too. And that's yellow, or moreover, that's the yellow deck. Now, as we move on to my closing thoughts on this set, I should open up by saying there are 1,000 ways to build it. Even with only 3 colors, there are a lot of different finishing and advantage combos, and a lot of them are quite viable. You can totally specialize into one color, or mix and match to your heart's content aside from the party combos. While yellow is standalone as a primary deck, it's very splashable in blue or red decks, which, thanks to a multitude of combos, can take on many different shapes. Goblin Slayer, Priestess, the Party Trio, Cowgirl, Sword Maiden, and even Guild Girl all have a lot of character support. And if I might say so, on a totally different note, the set looks awesome. I love the art they chose on a lot of these cards, and the SR bordering work is awesome. Now, one other thing I really like about this set is how tricky and techy it is. While the set allows you to build flexibly, each deck has a ton of moving parts that all work together and give you a lot of lines of play each turn. This is especially true with some of the events we showcased. I would say my favorite thing about this set is actually what it isn't. Generic. A bunch of these effects and strategies are very new or totally unseen in the current English game. The cards are all super flexible, the set is traded universally with the order trait, and it all melds together really well. I can't wait to try it out. You can expect to see some box openings on our channel come release day. But before I leave it, I want to just reiterate how pissed I am that there's no green enemy goblin faction. Come on, Bushi, what were you thinking? Don't worry. After all, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. So look forward to that, along with openings, deck techs, and other content involving Goblin Slayer for Weiss. Man, it looks like this December is going to be an expensive one. But oh well. I'll be seeing you players with a lot of new content around these releases for the holidays. But for now, stay tuned for the regular schedule, including a report for the Fall Regionals circuit. For those of you interested, I'll be attending the Secaucus Regionals this September. If you're going, I'll see you there. And as for the rest of you, I'll see you again with more videos soon enough. So as always, thanks for watching. Peace.